you struggling to stay consistent? Is the work that you need to do right in front of you, but for some reason, you can't get started on this work? Maybe your gym is 10 minutes away from your house, but even despite this, you've been skipping the gym for weeks now. Maybe you've told yourself that you want to upload 2 YouTube videos per week, and it's been 2 weeks now, and I've been pretty dry. Today in this video, I'm going to be explaining why we don't do the work even though it's right in front of us, and it would be so easy to get started. But more specifically, I'll be talking about why we can't bring ourselves to do the work and why it's so hard for us to even think about doing the work. And in the last part of this video, I'll be talking about how you can fix this and turn it around so you're excited to do the work and you can do hard work consistently and without too much struggle. So if this sounds interesting to you, then I'm sure that this video will be quite an interesting watch. My name is Danuga, and on this channel, I like to provide advice and insights onto things that I've learned on my path of trying to achieve my goals. So if you have similar goals to me, or if you have goals in general, then I'm sure that the things that I've learned can be applicable to your life, and my advice will resonate with you. So if that sounds interesting to you, then I'm sure that you find my content quite engaging. So here's why it's so hard to start doing work. Basically, every activity that you can do, your brain associates the activity with a certain amount of dopamine and oxytocin, where they're just 2 brain chemicals that represent how enjoyable you find the activity, and that can determine your likelihood of doing the activity. Here's what I mean. So the more enjoyable you find the activity, the more likely you are to have more dopamine from that, or the reason you find it more enjoyable is because you get more dopamine and more oxytocin from that, and that makes it more likely to continue to do that. And something that gives you less dopamine than normal, you find it displeasurable and you're less likely to continue doing that. Here's why. Basically, if you think back to hundreds of thousands of years ago, and think about the ancient cavemen, right? These cavemen, basically, they didn't have much good rational thinking. They just operated on their dopamine. They just did what they wanted to do, and the ones whose brains were wired in a certain way that allowed them to survive passed down their genes, but the ones whose brains were wired differently didn't. So here's what I mean. Basically, imagine there's a certain caveman who his dopamine comes up when he goes into the woods and explores or wages war on another caveman tribe, right? Doing some highly ambitious stuff. He's a really ambitious caveman. This caveman's brain is telling him to do work and be ambitious, right? This exploring the cave or fighting the other cavemen, he's gonna end up dying in this conquest, and as a result, he can't pass down his genetics. But the caveman, whose brain gives him more dopamine, when he sits down under the sun and eats berries all day long, he stays alive long enough to then pass down his genetics. So, whose genetics do you think you have flowing inside of your veins? Every single human, your genetics come from the caveman who wasn't ambitious and liked to just fuck around and do nothing. So it makes sense now why you want to fuck around and do nothing, because your brain and body is telling you that it's more safe to actually do nothing than to do work, right? Because if you think about, like, today, imagine today you procrastinate, or imagine you have a really big task you need to do today. Even thinking about this task this task can cause a stress response, or this thought can cause a stress response in your body, right? If you think about something big coming up, like a speech or a big work task, like for 2 hours you gotta consistently grind on this mock paper, then that can cause you a ton of stress. Like if you can look back and think, that's a situation like that has literally caused you to like sweat and have physical responses because of the thought of doing this work, right? That's because your brain literally associates this task with death, because your brain thinks if you do that thing, your life is in danger, and that's why you prefer to be doing the thing with higher dopamine oxytocin, because you're not in danger of dying when you do that task, right? So it makes sense to us now why our brain favors certain tasks over others. And unfortunately, because of the way of the world, the work we need to do, like the majority of the time, elicits less dopamine than the things that we could be doing instead of working. And as a result, is it a surprise now that we don't end up doing work? Because your brain is telling you your work will kill you and you will have much more fun doing something else. How is your brain gonna then overturn hundreds of thousands of years of biology and programming to then do the work? And if you do it once or twice, how can you do it long enough to be consistent enough to see the long-term gains, right? Because it's all well and good to do it one time, but to actually get long-term progress, you gotta do it consistently. And if your brain is telling you that this thing is so life-threatening, are you gonna do it consistently enough? I don't think you will. I don't think anyone can, right? So how do you rewire your brain to look at work not like a threat to your life, but something good and something productive? So I'll talk about that soon, but the first part is, first understand that if you've been procrastinating, understand that you're not entirely like a lazy human being. There is a reason why it's so hard to do work, and without understanding this, and without understanding why you can't stay consistent, you're not gonna be consistent anyway, right? So the first thing in this segment is understand why it's so hard to stay consistent. The reason is higher dopamine things, your brain will favor those like it's life prolonging, and low dopamine things, your brain will condemn them like it's life threatening. Do you see how much impact and gravitas your brain has about certain tasks? So you understand how serious this is now, and you understand how strong your brain is at giving you information that's not always in your best interest. So far I've told you that your brain is against you. So now how do you turn it around so you can actually do the work? Well, here's how. So this segment here will probably be the most important segment in this entire video, and this is me explaining why having insane amounts of willpower and discipline, even though it sounds like a straight superpower, isn't actually going to make you do really consistent work in the long run. The reason I think that even though discipline is so glorified as like grinding hard and glorifying the grind, if you genuinely hate the work that you do, I'm willing to bet the chances of you actually sticking to it are really low, right? Even if for like a month, that's a long time. If you're like trudging through the snow, like really like swimming in the mud, like working extremely hard, chances are after that month, you're gonna be so burnt out, you're gonna revert back to your old habits, right? This is the same reason that people sometimes try to go on diets to lose weight, and they go on super restrictive diets, and in a month they've lost so much weight, but they're so sick of dieting and they've become so disillusioned by the process of dieting. They just say, fuck, I'd rather just become fat all over again. Or obviously they don't say that, but they've just been so burned out and traumatized by dieting. In the next month, they're back to binge eating, right? Because their diet was not sustainable. In the same way, if you like literally hate the work you're doing, that's not sustainable, and you're not going to be able to do it long enough to see any reasonable gains. So the first thing to understand is that the whole key of staying consistent isn't to actually turn your brain off and work. Because if you could, that's genuinely a superpower and you don't need this channel at all. But if you can't turn your brain off and just mindlessly grind, even if it sounds like sometimes you can, in the long term, to turn your brain off like that, it's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to just shut up and grind for hours and hours and hours for years on years on years and then still maintain the same work ethic. You'll be so burnt out and like sick of doing work, right? We need to figure out a way to make doing work a bit more fun and tolerable so that you can do it consistently without having to like push through willpower. Here's how I see willpower. Willpower is like a bar, right? You've got a bar. Imagine this, I like this. This water bottle has like time on it, right? Imagine your willpower starts at the top here, in the top notch. There's something you don't want to do, right? But you do it anyway. We're down one peg. There's something else we don't want to do, but we do it anyway. We're down one peg. There's something you've really been like, we've not been wanting, like, we've been dreading it and hating it, but we do it anyway. Down one peg. Down one more peg for good luck. And now we're at the bottom with 0 discipline points left. How can we do work now? See, the problem is, it's like, my view is that discipline is super important because obviously if you haven't got anything in the tank, in our discipline tank, you can't do any work. But if your tasks use a full quarter of your bar, you can't do it for very long, right? So the relationship between willpower and making life more enjoyable isn't like you just stop having willpower so you can start doing work, but it's that you have willpower, but instead of using so much of it to do work, you start to change things a bit so that it's a bit easier to, you don't need to use as much willpower to do the work because it's not that hard, right? So that's the most important thing, understanding that it is super important to be disciplined, but discipline can't get you the whole way there. You need to do as much as you can to make the work enjoyable, meaningful, and productive in a way that you actually find that you inherently want to do it. And then you use the discipline to transition into that, right? Because no matter how fulfilling and fun doing the work is, not doing work is more fun. And that's where the discipline comes in to make you do the work. But if the work is literally like torturous, you haven't got enough discipline in you to do it consistently. But you have got enough discipline to do work that you find meaningful, productive, and enjoyable, but is a bit hard. You can do that consistently, and your dopamine, your bar here, it'll come down a small amount and it'll come back up afterwards because like you've done something. Like over time your bar comes back up, right? If you use it too quickly, then you're burnt out at the bottom. Burnout is where the rate at which you use discipline comes to the bottom without having enough time to grow up that bar again. Being consistent means you use as much discipline to do work as you get naturally over time. That's how you be sustainable in doing work, and that's how you stay consistent. It's a very like a rough analogy, I just thought of it, but if that makes sense to you and you understand that you can't fully rely on discipline, you have to do the work. You have to make your work sort of fun and sort of easy to do without making it fully like without taking away from the work, you change things to make it easier to do, then you use your discipline at the same rate that it goes back up, and then you're not going to come to the bottom and risk burning out. So now we understand the key difference between willpower versus changing the way we work so that we can use willpower more effectively to do the work. Now I'll tell you how, and just some things that I use which work for me, which make doing work a bit more bearable. So this is how you make doing work a bit more bearable. So I'm going to give you 3 points right away. No fluff, just 3 straight points. First thing, make the time before you start work less dopamine and quite boring so that you can then transition into doing the work. Make the work have more dopamine so that if you've followed step 1, you've been bored out of your mind in the first hour before you do work. So when you start doing the work, you actually want to do the work now because you're bored of doing nothing, right? And the third thing is to track your progress in the long term to maintain consistency. So now I'll go into each point step by step. The first point is try to decrease your dopamine level in the lead up to your work. What this looks like is instead of like scrolling on reels or doing something super fun before you do the work, you actively try to be bored as bored as possible before you start doing the work, because then when you start doing the work, you're not going to feel like, oh fuck, I'd rather be doing that thing, before you be thinking, I'm happy I'm not doing nothing. So an example could be reading, right? I've got a couple of books up here that I have this book here. I've showed it before in a different video. Basically, this book is like translated from Greek and it's so hard to understand. I read this before I study for the main point that this book and reading it is so boring that I prefer to study, right? That's something you could do, and this works for me. Another thing is some people like to meditate, some people like to just look at their roof and think about things. Just try and do something that isn't super stimulating so that as you start doing the work, then that transition is going to feel less like, oh, I'd rather be doing that thing I was doing before, because now you'll be thinking, I'm in a good mindset to do work, and before I was doing some really boring stuff. So that pales in comparison, or this pales in comparison, because the stuff before was just so brain dead. Now, the second point is try to make work more fun. So what this looks like is doing as much things as possible to, without taking away from your quality of work, make it more pleasurable to do work. So sometimes, like some examples could be, and also just quickly, for the point before, I gave some examples I use. Don't jump to use mine. Actually pause the video, or like after the video is done. Your work, I'll also reiterate this at the end of the video, but what I need you to do is to figure out some creative ways that you can try and lessen the amount of dopamine you have before you do work. And like in this point here, try and maximize your dopamine during work without decreasing your workflow, right? Don't use my examples just like that, but think about creative ways that you can implement them into your own life. So some examples for me include, if it's really like boring menial work, I like to listen to music or podcasts or stuff like that. This is quite risky for like high intensity work, like doing hard maths questions, because you need to use all your brain to do these maths questions. You can't waste brain power by listening to music. But like some easy shit, like doing some essay for English, like of course I'm gonna play some music in there, like I don't even like that, English studies. Some other things you could do is, you could even, I have like a bathrobe here, right? And I like to use this bathrobe to like, if it's like cold, instead of like wearing a jumper, I wear this bathrobe because this bathrobe like feels so comfortable that I enjoy wearing it. So I enjoy doing work or doing things while wearing it, right? Some other examples of this principle could be like, if you bought a new gym bag, you'll enjoy going to the gym to use the new gym bag you bought. Same goes for like if you bought some like sporting gear, then you'll enjoy using that purely because you enjoy using that thing. So if you have something that you have that you can use to make the work more pleasurable, wearing that or doing that will actually help you get more work done. Another thing is like have coffee or something like for me, if I do work in the morning, I'll have some coffee, not for the caffeine boost, but more for the taste of it. I know some people say like try and down as fast as possible and then focus. For me, I like to sip on the coffee a bit and like just enjoy it because that raises my dopamine of the work so that I can then work for like, instead of like being tired at like after like half an hour or like an hour, I can sustain that work for like 2 hours because even though my brain is quite fatigued, the coffee tastes nice, the bathrobe is soft, and I don't know, my pot plant here has good feng shui for the room, right? So you can clean your desk up and make it look pretty. You can do things like that to make doing the work more fun. Now here's a really good example actually. Here's a really good one. If you make your workspace so appealing with like posters and feng shui plants, and right now my room is a mess, right? My desk is like disgusting. But if I cleaned this, then I'd be more willing to use this to do work, right? So those are some things you can do to make the work more fun to do. If you're gonna go to the gym, you can like get some new gym clothes that feel comfortable and look nice, so then you're more inclined to wear them and then go to the gym. You can get like music which can then push you to do like a harder workout, right? You can do things which increase the dopamine while doing work, but the most important caveat is to not allow the things you do to increase dopamine to decrease your work rate, right? If I'm doing hard maths questions, I'm not gonna play music because that's gonna make it harder for me to do work. I'm not gonna wear this in the gym even though this is comfortable because in the gym I look like I don't know what I'm doing. And but more than that, if I'm wearing a bathrobe in the gym, I'm not gonna perform as like, I'm not gonna lift as heavy weight as I could as if I was wearing some actual gym gear, right? So that is some things to take note of. And the third thing, probably the most important in the long term, is tracking your progress. So for me, I use like a habit tracker app on my phone, but you can do anything you want really. But just try and track the progress in the long term, because a really powerful tool is building momentum, right? You will have noticed that if you've done work for a long period of time, like let's say you've had an exam week, right? So in the 2 weeks before the exam week, you were super locked in, doing a bunch of work, have like really high momentum. After the exam week, you'll notice that you'll actually be more productive in other aspects of your life. For me at least, I notice that after an exam week, I go to the gym more because I've got this positive momentum of doing so much work in the last 3 weeks. I want to then continue that momentum by applying it to something else that's productive as well, right? So the best way to get the most out of momentum is literally by understanding and seeing your progress. Seeing, for the last 3 weeks, I've been doing this good habit that I've been tracking on my habit tracker religiously, and this is motivating me to do it even more now. In the same way that if you've been slacking off for a long time, that can even cause momentum, where now you're so used to slacking off that doing work is harder than normal because you've built momentum is so powerful. So try and use it in a way that helps you, right? How I would recommend this is by getting a habit tracker and tracking your progress, tracking how many times in a week you do this good thing you want to do, and then that can actually, seeing the streak rise and seeing your proficiency rise, and seeing last week I averaged 6 hours, this week I'll average 7 hours, next week I'll average 14 and a half hours, right? There's some like made up numbers, but basically seeing your progress and seeing the gains will actually motivate more gains out of you. So those are my 3 principles to make doing work more easier to do, so that you don't waste too much discipline doing that work. And this means that because the work is easier, you can be productive without going through that slog of like forcing yourself to do it, which will then make you do, 1, it can be more quality work because you want to do the work, but 2, you can sustain that effort for longer periods of time without burning out. This is really high level stuff. Like, it took me a while to learn this, so if you like that I'm sharing it with you, then I'd appreciate likes, subscription, for like, you know, all that good stuff for me, because that helps me with like my growth and all that. But repay me the most by just hearing what I've said, trying to implement that into your own life, and seeing success. And once you do that, I'll see you in my next video.